Thank you all very much for that reception. I really appreciate it. So, as introduced, my name is Santiago. However, my full name is Scott Martin Santiago Estrada. And in the 1990s, I grew up in Saginaw, Michigan, and I grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood. And the kids in my neighborhood were kind of mean to me. They would say I was white on the inside and brown on the outside. They'd say I was a coconut. And this hurt my feelings a little bit. But I was like, joke's on you. I like coconuts. About the same time, I'm attending school. And the kids in my school, they would call me a taco. And one day I went home and I told my mom, and I said, Mom, these kids are calling me taco and they're bullying me. And she says, well, next time they say this, you call them a Polish sausage. And so the next day at school, when these kids were like, hey, taco, I was like, what's up, Polish sausage? And then they stuffed me into a locker. And this hurt my feelings a little bit too. The moral of that story is, don't take advice from my mother. So now it's 2026, and the world is crazy. It's going mad. And like I said, my name is Scott Martin Santiago Estrada. But these days, Scott seems a little bit safer. And I'm ready to dabble into my white privilege benefits. I hate it when people ask me, though, if racism is still a thing. Because I'm like, the next thing they're about to say is going to be racist. And then they ask me if I speak Spanish, and I got to tell them I don't speak Spanish. And they seem disappointed in me. And then they tell me that they do speak Spanish. And I got to tell you, I'm very proud of you. In the 1950s, the Catholic Church came to my grandparents' house. And they said, you can't speak Spanish anymore. You have to assimilate to the community. No more speaking Spanish or practicing Mexican cultures and traditions. However, it's going to be very important that come Sunday at church, you bring tamales. I did learn some Spanish, though, along the way. I learned it the hard way. In the 1990s, I was dating this girl. Her name was Selena. Selena was from Colombia. In Colombia, they speak Spanish. And I had a friend of mine, Ignacio. He spoke Spanish. And one day I'm over at Ignacio's house, and I'm on the telephone with Selena. And Ignacio was like, hey, I'm going to tell you something to tell her in Spanish. And it's going to knock her socks off. And I was like, hey, cool. I want to knock her socks off. And he says to me, tell her this. And so I relayed the message. And it said, yo tengo caca en mis pantalones. Some of y'all speak Spanish. Roughly translated means I have poop in my pants. His brother Carlos came from around the corner. He's like, you're stupid, bro. And then Selena was like, yeah, you're stupid, bro. That was the last we spoke. A couple weeks later, we're at this club, bar, restaurant in Saginaw called El Mirage. Roughly translated means the Mirage. And I was in the back of the bar with a couple of my buddies, and I had to walk up to the front of the bar to use the restroom. And in through the door walked these 5 or 6 cholos, means tough guy. And I don't know if I bumped them or they bumped into me, but the biggest one comes forward and he's like, what's up, ese? That means like, dude. And I thought he wanted to fight me, so I squared away and I kind of looked him dead in the eye, and I said, yo tengo caca en mis pantalones. And he looked at his crew and he's like, hey, let's go, this dude's loco. More recently, I was at work, and I'm a janitor. And I was driving a street sweeper, and I was driving into a parking lot, and this dude that I work with calls me over like this. And so I'm up in the street sweeper, and I call him over like this. And he comes up to me, and he looks up, and I open the door, and he says, you speak English? I was like, wow. I said, you speak Spanish? He said, no. I said, well, then I guess we speak English. And his head exploded. Even more recently, after work, a friend of mine and me, we went to the public library right after work, and we're in our janitor's clothes. And I walk up to the librarian at the front, and it's a big library. A lot of homeless people hang out there to escape the elements of the weather. But I said to the lady, I said, hey, where's the kids section, the kids' books? We're looking for some books. And she says, well, you got to go up this way, around the corner and to the left, and you'll find it. And she says, you can go in there, and you can look for books, and you can check out a book. But you cannot stay in there without a child. And so I looked at my friend, I said, I think she thinks we're homeless pedophiles. And about that time, I thought, it'd be funny if I said, where do I get a child? And so I looked at her and I said, well, where do I get a child? She didn't think it was funny, but we already had directions. I like words. I like the origin of words and what words mean and how we use them, why we use them. I like to ponder on these things and bring them into comedy, and I'm just going to share a couple of those with you right now. Some things that people say are, this is for shits and giggles, and I think, well, giggles seems like it should be enough. People say shit happens. I'm like, well, if it doesn't, that's constipation. I've heard people say, well, you're full of shit. That is constipation. I've heard somebody say, bless his heart, and I said, bless my finances. God's got my heart. Lastly, I've heard somebody say in an argument, let me spell it out for you. But then they never spell anything. That's it. That's my time. Thank you so much.